Hello, and welcome to Heavy Hands. I am your host, Lou Rawls, and with me, as always, is Philip Mackenzie. You may have been able to tell already, I'm a little sick this week for this edition, so it's going to be all Phil's dulcet, accented tones, soothing your ears, while I just sort of sit in the background and find various ways of expectorating and generating more phlegm than any of us thought humanly possible before this moment. But all of that aside, it is worth coming to work sick today, because on today's episode of Heavy Hands, we are going to talk about UFC 230, with its main event, of course, the heavyweight title fight, maybe the most absurd heavyweight title fight ever, between Daniel Cormier and Derrick Lewis, which is not to say it's not deserved. It's just weird in Derrick Lewis-y kind of ways. We're also going to talk about the co-main event, which, since a couple of weeks ago, is Chris Weidman versus Jacques Ronaldo Souza. That was originally the rematch between Weidman and Luke Rockhold, but that's off the table now. Still should be a pretty interesting fight between two top-tier middleweights. We're also going to talk about another middleweight fight, and would you believe it, this entire goddamn main card is nothing but middleweight fights with one heavyweight bout at the top. So a real classic for Phil and I, as you can imagine. But the main card opener is the other one we like. That's Derek Brunson versus Israel Adesanya. I'm sure many of you are excited to see how Adesanya deals with the most effective, powerful, and aggressive wrestler he's faced to this point in his MMA career. And then we'll wrap things up talking about Julio Arce, a Tiger Schulman prospect who has been looking real sharp lately and is going to be taking on Shayman Moraes, the sort of prospect of yesteryear, who sat out on the shelf for a little while and now is having a hard time, no thanks to these matchups, getting sort of back on the horse. So, Phil, please start talking. What do you make of this card as a whole?
It's real good.
It's not bad,
it's got
right?
It's got a lot of fun up and down the card. It's got some great prospects in the prelims, both the Fight Pass and the Fox Sports 1 sections. We've got some. I'm always down for watching any of the collection of Tiger Schulman Muay Thai Matryoshka dolls that gym tends to field.
Yeah,
like they always have just these aggressive, bearded, similar-looking, dangerous, aggressive counterpunchers, and I'm always down to watch any of them because they're great fun to watch. We've got Jason Knight coming back, and hopefully looking good. And then the main card is just, whilst it is all middleweights, and that's generally not, us aside, the greatest collection of the greatest idea. Like, they're all pretty entertaining. They're all pretty well booked, interesting, relevant fights.
Yeah. I mean, like Roberson Marshman, for example, is a far better idea than Carl Robeson's last fight.
Yep.
I
mean, it's clearly designed as a showcase, but it's going to be a hell of a fun showcase.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Marshman always throws down. Yeah, it looks like a really entertaining card to me. And there's a couple highlights even on the Fight Pass prelims. We have, like, Lando Venata's fighting Matt Frevola. Lando Venata will literally never get to fight a fighter who is not a crazy, aggressive brawler. But at least Matt Frevola will probably try to wrestle him a little bit as well and break up the strategy. And he's also certainly a lower level, less established opponent than the likes of which Venata is usually losing to these days. And Shane Burgos is coming back to fight Kurt Hollabaugh. I think that'll be a lot of fun. It looks really good. So I'm on board for all of this.
And then, as you said, it's topped out by one of the most heavyweight fights imaginable. Between one of the most unprepossessing elite heavyweights and light heavyweights, I guess, since Fedor Emelianenko.
Sure.
Daniel Cormier, and one of the most physically impressive and overwhelming and technically underwhelming heavyweights we've seen ever.
Yeah, since, I don't know, it's like if Giant Silva knew how to fight. I don't know. Can I say, by the way, while we're moving on, I did say, like before, I was like, Phil, I'm going to have to lean on you to talk. You're doing a phenomenal job. I really think you should be the host. You're doing a great job guiding this discussion.
Well, I mean, we've got issues here because you said you said that you need to avoid getting excited before the call because your voice is just going to split and break apart like dry wood, and that's going to be a problem if we're talking about guys like Derrick Lewis and potentially Anthony Smith.
Oh my God. Oh, sweet Jesus. We may have to wait for a bonus episode this week, to get to the discussion of UFC Moncton. We'll see how long it takes to get through the rest of this, but trust us, we cannot let Anthony Smith's greatest triumph to date, Anthony Smith firmly announcing himself as a top light heavyweight contender, maybe the top light heavyweight contender. We cannot let that go by unremarked upon. So, we will be talking about that. But how about Cormier and Lewis, huh? I think you kind of hit the dynamics of this matchup already, right? Like, Derrick Lewis is really big, and he fights the way a really big guy probably should, which is, to take into account how little guys always beat the super huge guys, which is by running around them and forcing them to move their giant fat asses, forcing them to throw, and just making their size and weight a factor that inhibits them more than helps them. And Derrick Lewis's style is perfectly attuned to that kind of archetypal heavyweight frame, because he does very, very little when he doesn't have to, which includes everything from striking offense to striking defense to wrestling defense. He appears to be constantly in great pain and in existential discomfort. And, but it's okay because he doesn't expend too much energy, which is great because he gets tired really fast. Although Phil, he did say he's done 3 hours a day in camp, for the last month. Yeah. Which is like almost like a real pro fighter's training schedule.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's going to have 3 times as much cardio.
Well, one can only imagine. He might come in. I mean, it's got to make him worse, right? I mean, my advice in my open letter to Derrick Lewis was to not change anything. There's no way he can actually improve because his success has been truly remarkable for how little he seems to know how to do.
I mean, we kind of hit on this when we were discussing it before, but one of the things is that Derrick Lewis's defense against things is so visibly awful that it really draws people into his fight. Is that his response to strikes being to literally cringe away and cover up in utter horror.
Usually the like actual defensive response, which happens like a good half second after the strike connects, is to cover the target with both hands, King Hippo style.
Yeah. But this is the thing. Yeah, this is an actual defensive response to strikes. I mean, he did it against like Roy Nelson, and that was his defense against Nelson's overhand. Mm-hmm. Was to basically hide.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he didn't come into a fight with Roy Nelson with a defense to the overhand right prepared. That's the depth of Derrick Lewis's actual striking technique.
But and similarly, he's a terrible wrestler, and then people tend to get the impression that they should therefore wrestle him.
Yeah. And
in both of these cases, it's people either get overly encouraged into, they just can't figure out why they're no longer winning striking exchanges or why they're suddenly getting so tired from wrestling with this guy. Mm-hmm. Because he'll just do things like, like standing up with Alexander Volkov on his back, mm-hmm. which you just can't do as a heavyweight, typically.
He did the same shit. Roy Nelson had him in side control, and he just stood up.
So in some ways, and this is the thing, were he less incredibly sincere and open, and just Derrick Lewis, I would think that this is game planning of some description, but I honestly don't think it is.
No.
So, I mean, the question is, does Cormier, so the question here is really one of distance, right? Cormier is a much smaller man, and how does he close in against someone like Derrick Lewis without risking too much? Because he's probably going to have to do it unless he just flattens him, which he perfectly possible. He's probably going to have to do multiple times.
Yeah, well, the thing about Derrick Lewis's style, which we've both gotten at, is that like, this is the thing you have to understand about Derrick Lewis. He needs the heavyweight division as much as it needs him, right? Like, his style works because most heavyweights will do the exact same shit in the exact same order, right? They'll have a series of revelations over the course of the fight, like, oh, I can't really finish him that easily. Oh, he seems to hit really hard. Oh, I'm really tired now that I've started to wrestle him. Oh my God, he's on top of me. That's the series of decisions that most people have to confront. And Daniel Cormier is not a heavyweight. You know, like, his advantage at heavyweight is much like Fedor Emelianenko's, is that he's the size of a light heavyweight. He's much quicker, much more agile. The last guy who sort of matches that description is probably Mark Hunt, who is much heavier than Daniel Cormier, and much more experienced and polished as a striker, but also older and more shop-worn. And speed and small stature has historically, I think, been the thing that really fucks Derrick Lewis up. Mm-hmm. So it's a question of, but the thing is like, Mark Hunt couldn't knock him out, and Mark Hunt only had 3 rounds to fight him. And Derrick Lewis was still there. He still could have knocked Mark Hunt out at any point because he's Derrick Lewis. And the earlier guys who knocked him out, that was before he discovered the sort of zen calm that now motivates his do nothing.
I mean, Mark Hunt did knock him out, but it was in the 4th round.
Okay.
It was a TKO, basically, where I think it was one of those ones where, like, it was more like a body language.
Yeah.
It's a bit like he did the cringing away thing so long that people were like, oh yeah, he actually isn't coming back now.
Okay, yeah. Good correction. It wasn't the kind of knockouts that he was suffering, back when he seemed to be really chinny, which has gone away since he's just chilled out. So yeah, like, is Daniel Cormier a polished enough striker to do that to him? Because he can take a pretty good shot. He's got really bad defensive technique, but he can take a pretty good shot, and he can move quickly and seems to have really good stamina, and always did as a quick little heavyweight. Can he do that? And then the second question, will he try to wrestle? And if he does the same thing happen to Daniel Cormier? It seems hard to imagine, right?
Yeah. I mean, so this is the thing, is that in many ways, Cormier does represent a bit of a nightmare style matchup for Lewis.
Yeah.
Because, as you mentioned, every one of his losses, I mean, even Mitrione is not a tall heavyweight. He is a fast-footed, he's a quick-footed sniper.
Yeah, he's
right?
maybe not super small in stature, but he's, quick, sharpshooter.
Yeah. And Sean Jordan, Daniel Cormier, in terms of striking, they've all been that kind of zip inside, land shots type striker, which Cormier is. You know, if you watch his fights against like Barnett, he's good at working off the jab. He throws combinations, which seems like it works particularly well against Lewis, who will just shell and retreat. So, and he's also, he is an Olympian wrestler. So the idea of him getting tired when he has success on almost anyone seems almost unfathomable. But on the other hand, it's Derrick Lewis. Yeah. I mean, so it seems like a bit of a horror style matchup for Lewis in a lot of ways. In that on the feet, Cormier is exactly the kind of person who's always troubled him. And if he tries his general trick of forcing people to wrestle with him until they get tired, it seems like this would be an incredibly impressive person to tire out by from your back.
Yeah, I mean, John Jones managed to do it with some of the best wrestling in all of MMA. Can Derrick Lewis do it with being big as hell? That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, but also John Jones did it by stopping the takedowns and just by basically crushing crushing Cormier by just leaning his upper body on him and just never letting Cormier really get a clean takedown off.
Whereas Derrick Lewis is likely to be single-legged off his feet within seconds of the fight starting.
Exactly.
And it is important to point out, Daniel Cormier is a far better top control grappler than the vast majority of heavyweights. Than probably almost any of them. He's got a good lockdown style top game. Still though, there's something to it, right?
The only worst matchup for I think the only worst matchup for Derrick Lewis would probably be Cain Velasquez, where he still a person and not just a stapled together collection of injuries.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, no, there's definitely something there. Cormier has been. I think we mentioned this before the Stipe fight. It didn't really come to fruition, but we shouldn't forget how badly Cormier has been hurt in a lot of his recent fights. He's been dropped or stung pretty badly by everyone. Uzdemir, Jones, Johnson, Silva, Gustafsson,
Johnson again.
In all of these, he took hellacious shots.
Yep.
His hand is injured. It's short notice. I mean, and Lewis is just bigger than him.
Yeah. Yeah, I think if I had to put a ratio on it, I'd say I really am feeling Daniel Cormier, because there's just so much I can't imagine Derrick Lewis being prepared for. But I would probably say I'm 75% sure Daniel Cormier will win this. But 25%, you can do a lot of work with 25% at heavyweight. And the one-shot knockout power that Lewis possesses is a genuine game changer. So I really didn't think that Anthony Smith would be able to survive last weekend. And having seen Derrick Lewis's sole apprentice ascend to the top of his own division, I am feeling really optimistic that Derrick may actually be able to do it. But I have to pick Daniel Cormier.
I mean, he's not at the top of his division yet, so this is the equivalent of Smith versus Jones or something. Would you be that confident? So
no, I would not.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. You have to pick Cormier, but I mean, the thing is that it would be just hilarious for Derrick Lewis to be the heavyweight champion, and it feels bad to think that, because Cormier has been through so much. He's fought through so much adversity. He's kind of come back, and he's finally put himself into pole position, kind of getting out from the underneath the shadow of Jones.
Yep.
And then for him to take this fight, which is admittedly, it is a little hubristic to take it in the first place, rather than, because there is the assumption that he's going to win and go on to fight Brock. But so there would be a little bit of Schadenfreude there. But on the other hand, somehow Derrick Lewis winning would be the ultimate affirmation of heavyweight as a division which is completely terrible, but you should watch it anyway because it's hilarious.
Or someone who looks like one of the best big fighters of all time can still just get knocked out by someone who barely seems to know what they're doing. Yeah,
in some ways it would provide me with closure, because I really when I first started writing about MMA, it was about JDS and Cain, and it was about really about them as fights and how they got there, and I think, and I was really invested in heavyweight. I sort of bought into that 2011 ideal. And I think, Derrick Lewis winning, it would help me to let it go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I'm with you there. All right, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, Phil will do a lot more talking, of course. We're going to talk about the co-main event, as I said before. Chris Weidman versus Jacques Souza. After that, Derek Brunson, big test for Israel Adesanya as he continues his efforts to climb the middleweight ranks. Very excited about that one, actually. And then a featherweight bout between Julio Arce and Shayman Moraes. All of that and possibly more after this.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening to this week's Heavy Hands. If you like what you hear, please consider pledging to support the podcast on Patreon. Patreon is basically continuous crowdfunding. You sign up to contribute a certain amount per month to help us with production costs and the like, and in return you get rewards ranging from a mention on the Heavy Hands website to a question or topic of your choice being discussed on the show. We have a lot more in the works to reward you for your help, and we appreciate every contribution. No amount is too small. Just head over to patreon.com and find how you can help out, the only show dedicated to the finer points of face punching. Now let's get back to it.
Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Heavy Hands, and we are moving on to the co-main event. You know what I've discovered, Phil? If I maintain an extremely monotone tone of voice without any inflection whatsoever, my voice does not crack, and you can almost not tell I'm sick.
Yeah, you don't sound sick, or at least not in any physical way.
How does this compare to the normal human voice with flaws?
Yeah, I mean, you could do that, or you could just get one of those text-to-speech converters. Then you can give it one of those, we could get a Stephen Hawking vibe, or just one of those.
First segment, I say, I'm your host, Lou Rawls. Second segment, I'm your host, Stephen Hawking. Back from the grave. Oh, damn, they're both dead.
You could get it with a pre-configured accent, so, which you love.
I do, yeah.
Maybe even Northern Irish.
I have been working on my scouse. Should I show you what it sounds like? I just imitate Darren Till. I think as far as my accents go, it's pretty fucking great. It's not bad. It sounds like I'm from Liverpool, at least a little bit. It's fucking great. That's the best phrase.
It's much better than the rest of your accents.
Yes.
I will definitely say that for it.
Really just the phrase fucking great is how I get into it. All right. Well, I may slip back into that Stephen Hawking voice if this one starts to fail me at any point soon, but we do have a pretty enticing middleweight fight to talk about here, my friend. Chris Weidman, Jacques Souza. Do you have any thoughts on this compared to the original fight? Which one you would rather have seen? This or Weidman Rockhold 2?
I think I have them about equal in terms of what I would like to see. I don't think that maybe I would rather see this one, but I have some significant caveats, because I think that the Weidman-Rockhold style matchup was relatively well established in their last fight, and I don't really see that changing very much.
Yeah.
In that Weidman is at heart a wrestle boxer, and Rockhold at heart has been designed to kill wrestle boxers. Weidman is his natural kind of prey.
Yes, Weidman is aggressive, and Rockhold's defense is god-awful. So there was something to it. But it was also, as we've discussed many times now, I think it's easier to get excited about this fight because if it were the first fight between Weidman and Rockhold, and I had yet to really suss all that out, I'd probably be pretty hyped. But having seen the first one and how curiously bad both guys looked against each other, this one is it's something new. So
yeah. So yeah, and this one's really interesting because it's more of it's a little more of the who's the best at this particular style matchup, and Chris Weidman and because they're both at heart, they are both wrestle boxers.
They're both very similar styles. Yeah.
Just with a few, but they've got very different emphases in terms of what they tend to emphasis in terms of what they want to do as far as being a wrestle boxer goes. And this is where the caveats come in, because I'm perhaps controversially going to say that I think that Souza is also a fairly bad matchup for Weidman.
Interesting.
But my major caveat is how shot do I think he actually is.
Yeah.
And I've been suspecting that Souza might be quite shot for some time.
Do you think in that Gastelum fight could have been his last hurrah? Because it would be a fitting last hurrah. It was quite an effort that he had a claim to winning. But he had to go through hell in that fight. They both did, but Jacques is 39.
Yeah, and he was still walking Gastelum down whilst visibly being utterly exhausted at the end of it. And this was the thing. Even when he knocked out Derrick Brunson, I remembered looking at that fight and thinking, I don't know if the Terminator walk knockout was incredible to watch, but I was also looking at it and thinking, I don't think you can actually move that much faster than that anymore, which is very different from what we've thought of as from Jacare historically, because he was always that incredibly explosive, athletic, cover distance in a flash kind of fighter. Yeah, and that is just not there anymore.
I mean, my God, remember the era of all the spinning shit he threw when he fought Luke Rockhold?
Oh yeah,
he used to be like this hyper athletic, do anything at any time kind of fighter. He was less well defined than he is now. I think his style's more reliable than it was, but he has absolutely, very clearly lost several steps in terms of speed and agility. He's just an older man. How old is he actually? Let's see. He's 38.
He's 39. Is that right?
He'll be 39 come December 7th, so he's just about 39.
Okay. So I think he's become more of a technician, and like you said, much more of a reliable fighter. And I think his style has become much more defined, which was one of the reasons why he was able to take out Brunson. Is that he is, to my mind, he is an aggressive counterpuncher. He basically forces people backwards, and then he comes with either that short right hand or the left hook. If they don't attack him, he will just basically snipe them with kicks. And if they try and commit to kind of longer exchanges, he'll just grab the clinch. Or if they just keep moving backwards, he'll just take them down against the cage. And it's relatively simply defined, but not necessarily. But it's relatively simple, but it works in a multitude of different ways. It makes sense. So from that perspective, Weidman's kind of open defense and aggression, I think much in the same way as Brunson's, plays poorly with Jacare. In that I think he would just open himself up to the counter right hand, the counter left kick, and he's just not able to. He wouldn't be able to stand at a distance with Jacare.
Yeah, interesting point. Yeah, I would say broad strokes, their styles are pretty similar, as you've already said.
Yeah.
But almost every the specific emphases, as you said, they change. But the broad categories of how they like to fight, they both like to pressure. They both like to force their opponents against the fence and try to wrestle them from there. They're both good submission grapplers. And they're both very keen to catch their opponents in submissions while they try to scramble out of a bottom position. But yeah, the particulars of how they work each of those areas are pretty different. Obviously, Weidman has a really sort of unique approach to submission grappling. He can do a lot of stuff very well on the ground, but he's got a very particular style that suits his wrestler's background. But on the feet, the big difference is very clearly Weidman is more of your classic pressure fighter. He's not a swarmer. You can't throw all that much because it seems to tire him out. But he likes to come forward and initiate and force you to react. And so the big question is, as long as this is on the feet, the two big questions to me, who gets to come forward, is what I'm concerned with, because there may be some messy exchanges that don't go Weidman's way, but if Jacare can't compete with him physically, it's quite possible, I think, that Weidman does manage to force him backwards early on into the fight, and then he will probably, despite lacking the speed, I think, at least be able to rely on his reach and his jab to give to make it a little harder for Jacare to counter than he was able to counter Gastelum. And then forcing Jacare backwards from close to the beginning of the fight. I don't know. I mean, does that seem not seem like a possibility to you?
Yeah, I think it is, but this is also this is one of the reasons why Rockhold Weidman, I think, is and remains a tough matchup for Weidman, is that both fighters are poor defensively.
Yeah. And
this was, something that a lot of people picked up on even before that fight. Rockhold had one or two defensive options in moving backwards. You know, he has the right check hook. He has the straight left.
Yeah.
He doesn't have much. He tends to retreat in straight lines and on all this other kind of, you know, he leans back over and leaves his front leg out there. He's got all his defensive flaws, but he has defensive counterpunching options. Weidman does not really have much in the way of any kind of defensive. So the question isn't necessarily like in a lot of these kind of matchups. I think the question isn't necessarily who's the better pressure fighter, but who's the fighter that can survive in the area where the other guy, you know, when the other guy has his turn? Because unless you knock the other guy out instantaneously, you're going to have these points where, and this is the thing, is that Weidman could push and did push Rockhold back. But when he did, he was still in danger. And Jacare against Gastelum, he had, you know, numerous times when he was on the back foot and Gastelum was pressuring him, and Jacare still caught him with counters.
Yeah,
Weidman is simply not a good counter puncher at all. So, I mean, I think that definitely Weidman can push Jacare back, but unless he gets him out of there early, he will be forced back at some point himself, and he is tremendously vulnerable once this happens.
Yeah, because his one-size-fits-all defensive response is not to back away while swinging at least something. His is to cover up and shut his eyes and hope the other guy gets tired before he, you know, leaves.
And
leaves this mortal
Jacare
plane.
is genuinely a pretty decent counterpuncher.
He's not. I wanted to emphasize that because there was some misinformed bastard on Twitter. Some very cordial, normal person on Twitter who was like, I don't know, I think like Jacare's shot selection is just not, really limited. Like, isn't Weidman going to outstrike him? And I was like, I think you may be underselling Jacare's striking, because yes, he has a fairly limited shot selection now. It's not like, I mean, like, as I said, we used to see him throw all kinds of shit. I think he has deliberately pared down what he throws over time. But that does not necessarily mean that he can't be tricky with the limited array of shots. There's a lot of different ways you can goad someone into opening themselves up for some manner of counter right hand, you know, and he found about a dozen of them over and over again against Kelvin Gastelum. And he found plenty of them against Derrick Brunson as well. My concern really is longevity of Jacare. I think this may be the rare middleweight matchup at this point that Weidman can really win on endurance and stamina. That even the exchanges going badly for him, Jacare, I mean, speaking of limited strike selection, if Kelvin Gastelum had more than like a 1-2 and occasionally a 3-2 in his arsenal, I would like to think he should have been able to knock Jacare out, because Jacare was absolutely exhausted after the first round of that fight. I mean, credit to him, he managed to hang in there. So if Weidman's on a similar playing field at that point, then yeah, Jacare is still absolutely at least 50-50 in this fight, and I would probably favor him. But I kind of have to wonder what happens to his wrestling, what happens if Weidman suddenly realizes he's much, much fresher and Jacare is just too old to recover that stamina at any point in the round, you know? But your point is essentially that even if he's more tired, even coming forward, Weidman is much more defensively vulnerable, which is true. I agree. So it's tough.
But no, I think that dynamic is perhaps the most important one for me, because like I said, I am sort of fairly convinced by this point that Jacare is very physically declined. Mm-hmm. I think he really is a cunning veteran at this point. Yeah. And surviving on like will and, I mean, he's still very physically strong, but I think a lot of his other physical gifts have left him.
He has the poise of a very experienced fighter. He's still tough, and he's still powerful. He has all the things that old great fighters generally have going for them, but little else at this point. And I do want to say too, like, I mean, because of that, I think, from my perspective, and I may have given it away already, but I think I'm picking Weidman here. But because of that physical disparity at this point, I think that Weidman's wrestling and grappling are going to become bigger and bigger factors after the first round. I think it's very possible Weidman has a tough first round and quite possibly gets hurt or dropped. But once he starts to pressure Jacare, I think he can start to wrestle him. And frankly, like, Weidman is sort of a nightmare for a guy whose jiu-jitsu is normally overwhelming to his opponents, because Weidman is a prodigy on the mat, and an accomplished wrestler who can do a whole variety of different takedowns, off of his pressure. So I'm kind of imagining that, that was like Gastelum didn't have any other options, and he still almost lost to Jacare just by eating that counter right hand over and over again. If Gastelum had been able to take Jacare down and make him scramble, if Gastelum, if he just had any other options, I think that fight would have been a lot more convincingly his, and he still won it. So, yeah, I just feel like Weidman is gonna struggle early, but eventually his pressure is going to be is going to lead to a lot more options than Jacare's.
Yeah, I mean, so this thing, if we look at all the fights between these men, if we look at Gastelum versus Weidman and Jacare, and Jacare versus Rockhold and Rockhold versus Weidman, all these kind of, all the matchups between these guys, is that they've tended to be very physical, grimy fights, and where both guys have been exhausted at the end.
Because everyone at the
almost
top of middleweight
exception.
the top five of middleweight is defined by phenomenal athleticism. That's the whole thing that makes it not the rest of 185.
Yeah, none of these fights have been like technical matchups where they've been decided by a few strikes every round. They've been slugfests and wars, and they've been full of grappling, and the physicality and endurance has really played a big role. I mean, my main question mark on Weidman's end is probably his durability. That he got blasted by Gastelum and was lucky to escape without getting
his track record is
out. Certainly
not more inspiring than DC's. He's been hurt in worse ways in all of his recent fights as well. I'm trying to think, actually. TKO'd after looking like shit against Gegard Mousasi, brutally knocked out by Yoel Romero, brutally TKO'd by Luke Rockhold, hurt by Vitor Belfort, hurt several times by Lyoto Machida. So yeah, it's been for him. You have to go back to 2013 to find a Chris Weidman fight where he wasn't stunned by his opponent at least once.
Yep. And so, and you have to look at this and think, like, if Chris Weidman took the shots that Gastelum took and that Brunson didn't, does he survive that when he comes out and Jacare still has a bit of pop and a bit of power and a bit of speed? But unfortunately, I have to say, I kind of think he probably does. Because his knockouts have mostly been to crazy stuff or weird stuff or just sheer, Luke Rockhold. These are finishes from some of the most adept finishes we've seen in this division, and so I can't trust Jacare to get him out of there that early. Jacare, normally when he gets people out of there early, it is primarily because he gets them down, he gets an arm triangle. Yeah. He doesn't normally, or he polishes them off with ground and pound. He's not normally a one-hitter quitter. And if it turns into one of those ugly, kind of grinding physical matches, I just don't trust Jacare to stay the distance, much as I think he's actually, in many ways, the better fighter.
Yeah, I think I agree with that assessment. You surprised me. I thought you would pick Jacare, but I think I agree with that assessment, like, all across the board, because it's a very compelling, close matchup, and it's really just the fact that I think it has something to do with probably how, like, that does probably have something to do with shot selection and the increasing slowness with which Jacare throws his shots. But you really have to surprise someone usually to knock them out with a single punch. And at the very least, it's hard to be surprised when Jacare tries to throw a counter right hand at you, unless he really times it perfectly. So, yeah, I agree. I'm going with Weidman by decision, and I really think the wrestling and grappling are going to be at least favorable options down the stretch if this does turn out to be really difficult for Weidman at some points, which it almost certainly will. At the very least, like the more physically fit fighter tends to have a pretty sizable advantage once it gets into that grinding kind of ground battle. So,
yeah, I think I'm actually going to take Weidman by late and quite sad knockout. Probably due to ground and pound. I mean, if Jacques gets as tired as he did against Gastelum, I just think Weidman is, again, like many of these guys, a tremendous finisher. So a sad pick for me.
All right. Well, we're going to move on to segment 3 now. We'll only have time, I think, to discuss the 2 remaining fights on our docket, those being Derrick Brunson versus Israel Adesanya and Julio Arce versus Shema Moraes. Hopefully, you should check out our Patreon. We're going to talk about Anthony Smith on a bonus episode this week, but I'm very excited to give you a preview of that at the start of the next segment because, Phil, Derrick Brunson may be the only current or former middleweight more painfully insecure than Anthony Smith, and that alone makes a matchup with Israel Adesanya compelling to me. So we'll get into that and more after this.
Financial support is fantastic, but there are other, even easier ways to support Heavy Hands. Perhaps the best is by spreading the word. We know our fan base. You're all cool, popular people with serious social media presences. You're tastemakers and trendsetters. Okay, there are 1 or 2 of you that don't fit that description. You know who you are, but no matter what, you can always help us out by telling folks about the show. And you can also give us a positive rating and review on iTunes and Stitcher, things like that. We rely on word of mouth and positive feedback to grow and improve, so thank you very much for your time and your help. Now, back to the show.
All right. Might as well, while the vocal cords still have a little juice left in them, you want to push on to segment 3?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Hello, and welcome back to Heavy Hands. We're moving on to the main card opener of UFC 230 here. Derrick Brunson versus Israel Adesanya. Adesanya has been the hot prospect, certainly one of the most entertaining prospects maybe that we've ever had in the UFC to watch coming up, just by the very nature of his crazy, eccentric, creative, striking style. But we keep waiting for the moment at which a wrestler will test him, because for all that he looked all right defending the takedowns of Brad Tavares, and for all that he does this crazy scrambling Tony Ferguson type shit to escape them and seems to have this unbreakable confidence, for all of that, for all of that, you have to imagine there's gonna be someone at middleweight who just gets on top of him and makes him look terrible on the ground, because he has spent his entire fighting career up to this brief MMA stint kickboxing. So, is Derrick Brunson that guy? What do you think, my friend?
Maybe.
Mm-hmm. That feels like the last 2 matchups.
I mean, this is one of those questions where he beat Marvin Vettori, who is nominally a top position grappler, and not without some issues, not without getting taken down. And then he fought Brad Tavares, who is a good wrestler, but primarily a defensive, a strong defensive wrestler who can also, has by this point enough depth in his game to be able to scramble and, even if he gets taken down, can sweep and change positions and win against accomplished grapplers like fairly good grapplers like what's his name,
Talaslitis.
He didn't really get taken down at all.
Oh, we're talking about his ground.
Who's the Elias Theodorou?
Okay, sure.
Primarily a grappling match, but Tavares did not really have the aggressive wrestling game. So the issue here is that Derrick Brunson can probably if he takes Adesanya down, Adesanya is in deep trouble. But there's a significant chance that he just won't be able to do that. And if he can't do that, there really aren't that many high-end grapplers left at middleweight for him.
Yeah,
there's no real tests to give him after that point other than Jacques, Weidman, and Romero.
And boy, does that sound daunting, right? That to know as Israel Adesanya, it's like, well, I could still beat Derrick Brunson, but then the real test is yet ahead of me. Like, it gets so much more complete and difficult than Derrick Brunson in this division. It's so stratified. Yeah, I mean, by far, Derrick Brunson, of all the guys we've mentioned in the UFC who fought Adesanya, is by far the most defined by his wrestling. By far the most pathologically aggressive. A big question for me on that point is how much do you expect Brunson to indulge his aggressive tendencies? Because it depends, right? Like the last time we saw Brunson really not comfortable enough to be aggressive was against Anderson Silva. He had an immense amount of respect for the counterpunching and technique of Anderson Silva and allowed a very slow fight, which admittedly he should have won, but he allowed Anderson Silva to convincingly bullshit his way to victory because he did so little. And in other matchups, I mean, that right there, I mentioned Brunson's terrible insecurities, which affect everything he does in the cage. So that's one way they affect him. When he's really nervous and is like, wow, you might be able to outclass me if I fight stupid, I'll be really careful. Or he comes into the fights, and this is more common, thinking my only hope is to obliterate this man seconds into the first round. And anything, I'm going to get so tired doing it that anything after that, I won't be able to handle. Which of those approaches do you think he'll take against Adesanya? Because the second one seems like suicide to me. I don't think you could possibly win a slow-paced kickboxing match with Adesanya. And if you're Derrick Brunson, it's not, I don't know, like his wrestling game is all right. If Adesanya's pressuring him, he could get a reactive shot off. He's got some good ones. He did those against Romero. But realistically, Adesanya is super comfortable pressuring because he's so aware of everything coming back at him. It's much more likely to take him down against the fence, but the only way Brunson does that is by bull rushing people and going absolutely nuts, swinging the tensest punches you could possibly imagine at them, trying to force them back before using every ounce of his strength to drag them to the ground. To me, it seems like that would be the best route of the two. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing, is that one seems like it has a high chance of getting absolutely humiliated, right? Of just looking like a complete moron and getting just dinged in the head as he rushes forward, much like the Whittaker fight.
Yeah. Or,
to a lesser extent, the Souza fight, where he just tries to bum rush a counter striker and just gets completely.
A big factor of the Whittaker fight was Whittaker's defensive wrestling. Without it,
yeah,
he probably would have succumbed to that pressure because he did have to fight off at least 2 or 3 takedowns against the fence and get back to striking. Meanwhile, he was also being hit a lot. And Adesanya is he's one of those fighters who's so organic that I think it takes him a minute to figure out which of the thousands of possible techniques he's going to rely on in this fight. It takes him, he has to get a feel for his opponent. Once he does, he's sensational. But it's not like Brad Tavares wasn't hitting him a good amount early. And it just had harder and harder time as the fight went on. And Whittaker took a lot of shots in that wild 1-round fight with Brunson as well, in addition to having to fight off the wrestling.
Yep. So, yeah, I mean, I tend to agree with you that it's one of those things where, I think that in a lot of these cases, people say that people tend to overrate the psychological aspect of fights. He's in his head. Look at how this guy reacted at the weigh-ins and blah, 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 blah. And it's mostly trash. In this case, I think it genuinely might be effective for Adesanya. Because what he wants to do is he really wants to pull that Anderson Silva fight out of Derrick Brunson. That is his best case scenario. I mean, because the thing is that Brunson is not a bad fighter, even though he's been sort of reduced to a bit of meme fodder in wake of the Brunson in wake of the Jacques and Whittaker losses. I mean, the thing is that I look at him and I wonder whether he's actually, like, you've mentioned that Tony Ferguson, you wonder whether he has poor eyesight.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder whether Derek Brunson is actually blind. Like, whether he is the Zatoichi of MMA. Because...
And let's be real. I mean, Zatoichi is obviously more impressive, but that's a fictional character. Derek Brunson is about as good as you could possibly do fighting literally blind.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive if that is actually the case.
Because here's the thing that seems to govern whether Derek Brunson does well or how confident he is in his fights, is that he needs to feel where someone is before he can hit them.
Yeah.
And not necessarily in a measuring distance way like Tony Ferguson, is that he literally needs to have pretty much most of his knockouts, most of his significant moments of offense, he needs to have one hand on them.
Yep.
And then he can punch them.
Koscheck style. He just has to like reach out and rake at you so he can feel where you are and then just crudely sling this tense, monstrous left hand at your head.
But once he does that, he's actually pretty dangerous. You know, he's fairly confident and does, and hits horrifically hard.
Yep.
But if you look at things like, his Machida knockout, pretty much any one of his big wins, it's been because he's felt where the guy is and has then just hit where he's known they're going to be.
Yep.
And in his fight against Silva, it was a fight that, to be honest, I think most people think that he won, but everyone was fine because it was not hugely eventful and because Silva so clearly gamed his way into winning that it was funny.
And Brunson won it by virtue of like a half dozen more low kicks. Like it was not. Everyone was just grateful to see Anderson.
But the thing is, he also did wreck Silva pretty badly in the clinch, and this has been that's been probably Silva's biggest issue in his late career run, is that he's, of all the sort of elements of his old style that he's jettisoned, he's still kept holding on to the clinch despite the fact that he always loses it now.
Yeah.
And Brunson is tremendously dangerous there. So the question for Brunson is always, how do I get hold of this guy? And so he's either like, I have to let this guy run onto me and then grab him, or I just have to literally charge him. And so from that perspective, it's a tricky one for him. Is that how does he close distance on Adesanya? If you look at that Silva fight, he starts off the fight from an absurdly long distance away. He is extremely uncomfortable. He's extremely uncomfortable from actual striking range.
Yeah.
He's either incredibly. It's one of his primary issues is that he's either incredibly far away, or he's rushing in.
He bridges the gap with like all the confidence of someone who's never played Mario, trying to do one of those parts where you have to jump from one little platform to the other. Like he's just so focused on, I'm trying to get to the other side. I'm safe here. I'm safe there. Just fucking pray, in all the spaces in between. So like for all of his organic, warm up period, I think it's very possible that Israel Adesanya can move well enough and predict those stiff movements well enough and prod and poke Adesanya on the way in often enough to really like, put a huge dent in his confidence. And there's not much confidence there already. Like there's a reason Brunson fights in one of two, incredibly limited ways. So I don't know. It still feels really iffy to pick Adesanya though against a wrestler this good, and also someone who is by far the most athletic, the fastest, the strongest, the most powerful of the guys he's fought to this point as well. Like it's not impossible at all that with the threat of the takedown rushing forward, Brunson can knock Adesanya out. Just hit him with one. Brunson has huge power in his left hand, so very tough to call for me.
Yeah, in general, I think that. In general, I do think that Brunson. We've seen that Brunson is has been psychologically affected by losses before.
Mm-hmm.
I think, we saw against Anderson Silva, he was very clearly worried about being on the end of another highlight reel comedy knockout.
He was reliving the Whittaker
if he'd
fight.
done to Anderson Silva what he tried to do to Robert Whittaker, it almost certainly would have worked.
Yes. And it might work against Adesanya. That's the thing. It very well could work.
But this is the thing. But he's once again coming off a fight where he rushed in, and again, because as we mentioned, Souza is a natural counterpuncher. It was his blitzes getting countered that forced Brunson backwards, and then just led to him getting knocked out.
Mm-hmm.
And I just can't trust him not to be like, oh well, I got knocked out trying to be aggressive again. Time for me to just have a patient technical match with this guy, which would be an obviously terrible idea. But as you said, like, I don't think Brunson is a tremendously analytical fighter once it gets into the actual cage.
Yeah. It's a shame too, because the one performance that really stands out in my mind is his fight with Lorenz Larkin.
Yeah, I was going to mention that.
He could absolutely replicate that kind of game plan with great success against Adesanya. Just focus on tying him up and just every once in a while bashing him with a power shot while he's trying to scramble free. But really against Larkin, it was the best he's ever, probably because he was still with Jackson Wink at the time, the best he has ever harnessed his insecurity was okay, well, the safest thing to do is to hold him down. And he did that really well against a very dynamic athlete and one who's far more experienced fighting off takedowns than Adesanya. So, that could also be the most reliable way to a knockout win for Brunson. If he can just pin Adesanya against the fence between the fence and the ground and hit him with a big left hand every now and then when he opens himself up. But I don't.
Also worth noting, Adesanya, not a big middleweight.
No,
and
not at all.
Brunson, a huge middleweight.
Yes. Yeah. But I just don't. Yeah, I agree with you. After that Jacare fight, and Brunson hasn't replicated that performance since, and he has been training in South Carolina or whatever, at his local gym ever since, as far as I know. And it does seem to have reduced him to a fairly limited way of thinking about matchups strategically.
We've occasionally maligned Jackson Wink somewhat for the technical polish of the fights they produce, but in terms of confidence and game planning, you don't get better.
Yeah, and building styles around a fighter's mental limitations, like that. Yeah, Brunson is a classic case of a fighter who benefits from the Greg Jackson style of coaching, no doubt. And without it, he's now a fighter who is still no more technical than he was then. But Jesus, man. Remember the fight with Yoel Romero, how fucking good Derek Brunson looked. He has had some really intelligent performances in them. I just don't expect him anymore. And even fighting as a prisoner of his own fear and shame, he still stands a very good chance of knocking Adesanya out or out-wrestling him, depends on how it goes. But I kind of think Adesanya is going to get in his head really early, and Adesanya knows, he's going to do everything in his power to cement the fear in Brunson's mind that Adesanya is just too slick for him. And I really think that'll have an effect on the likes of Derek Brunson. So I think
much like sorry, I interrupted you.
No, you're fine. Go on.
It's basically much like the Khabib Conor style matchup, right?
Sure.
Is that you can look at the first round and you've probably got a very good idea of who's going to win.
Yes.
Unless someone's won already. If Brunson gets takedowns in that first round, he's traditionally a very momentum-based fighter.
Yeah. But there's something to Adesanya, right? Every round starts on the feet, and he is one of those truly gifted and technically super well-rounded strikers who could probably still find his way back into the fight. It's just that once Brunson realizes he can take him down, what's to stop him from doing it again? I still don't trust Adesanya's defensive wrestling that much. So, I'm picking Adesanya, though. I feel very risky about it, and it's the first time I've picked him. I expected both the last two guys to be too much for him. I think Brunson is just limited enough in his own unique ways that Adesanya will get yet another win in his gradual ascension. Are you going for Izzy as well, or?
Yeah, I think I am, and I share your level of concern that this could not only be a loss, but it could be a really bad loss. It could be like a Krylov versus Blachowicz type thing, where you suddenly realize, hey, this guy's kind of noodly, and he's just stuck on bottom, just getting absolutely mauled.
Yeah, distinctly.
And what was I even thinking? So it'll be an interesting one.
I agree. I'm very much looking forward to that. I have enjoyed every moment of Adesanya's ascension so far, and I am amped to see how high he can go. All right, let's very quickly get into the final matchup we wanted to discuss before we wrap things up. This was kind of the sort of prospect highlight of the undercard in my eyes. There are actually quite a few decent matchups on this preliminary card. Like Lyman Good is here. Unfortunately, Ben Saunders, who has been looking very shaky lately, is probably going to lose to him. But like I said, Frivola Venata is cool. Burgos Holobaugh is cool. Adam Bichirek versus Marcos Rogerio de Lima is heavyweight. There's a lot to like here, but probably the best, most relevant, like the fighter who seems like he'll matter the most to his division in the near future is Julio Arce. And the guy he's taking on, Shema Moraes, sort of had that shine a couple years ago. And then some injuries. He had long layoffs. Now he's come back, and despite still being a phenomenal athlete, a phenomenal athlete with a very good base set of skills, he has had a little bit of difficulty in the UFC. He debuted in the UFC against Zabit Magomedsharipov, of course, and was largely outgrappled and dominated on the floor by Magomedsharipov, and just didn't have enough volume or consistency on the feet to do any business there. Matt Sales, on the other hand, ate all of the hardest shots exchanged in their fight, but by virtue of being a fairly relentless and quite technical, especially defensively, fighter, he was also able to make Moraes look pretty mortal. He tired out. He was gasping for breath by like halfway through the bout. And it was just his athletic edge, I think, that really sealed the deal. Because otherwise, Matt Sales was fighting a very smart fight against him. So here in Julio Arce, we have still maybe not as good as Moraes in terms of athletic talent, but easily, I think, the most well-rounded technical kickboxer he will have fought to this point in the UFC, who does have hand speed and real meaningful power, unlike Sales. So I don't know if I've given it away, but I am feeling Julio Arce in this fight. What do you expect the matchup to look like, though?
I mean, so Moraes is, he's very much one of these technical, well-rounded kickboxers who has a reasonable depth to his grappling game as well, but sort of has, I suspect, relied on being insulated by one of these three things, which is either his kickboxing or his wrestling or his baseline athleticism.
Yep.
And if he doesn't have one of these three major advantages, then he's kind of got some issues, because he's not particularly high paced. He doesn't have a huge amount of depth to his grappling game, although he's a willing wrestler, but he can be, as Magomedsharipov showed, he doesn't have a lot of grappling nuance.
Yeah, Marlon Moraes submitted him as well.
Yeah, and he's explosive, but not a ridiculous finisher, and so can get kind of worn down the stretch. So he's very much an example of one of these fighters who can, when he's coming up, he looks absolutely incredible. You're like, what more could you want from this guy?
Yep.
And so Julio Arce, on the other hand, has a much more, on the face of it, much more limited game. He is primarily a boxer, and he is, as mentioned, one of the many bearded Tiger Schulman tanks on this card, all of which I kind of expect to win in pretty cool fights. So I just expect him to be able to, and he's also one of the things I like about the Tiger Schulman fighters coming up is that they have pretty good defense.
Oh yes,
at least pretty good first line defense. It's very hard to get them with basics.
They all have aggressive defense too. They're all good trigger counterpunchers. Mm-hmm.
Yep. Yeah, aggressive counterpuncher seems to be the style that they train. And Arce in particular, I think, has been good at kind of drawing people in, and then he can hit people with, multiple combinations on the way back. He's a very comfortable combination boxer, and I just tend to favor his work rate over Moraes. Yeah. When people have been able to get to these this kind of generation of Tiger Schulman guys, it's been in real, they've had to show real striking depth of the kind that I haven't really seen from Moraes.
Yeah.
It's been things like, the Calvin Cater against Shane Burgos type thing, where it's been, multiple adjustments over the course of the fight to draw the counters to the jab out and then bring the 1-2 back out.
Yep.
Back. This kind of thing. And I'm just not sure that Shaman Moraes has that. It seems to be like a surface level, well-rounded game that is fueled by some really impressive athleticism. But I think that, especially because Arce operates from a range which makes low kicks quite a risk. Mm-hmm. He's generally comfortably inside his own boxing range. I think it's just a rough matchup for him.
I will say the one thing I think to watch out for here, because despite having relatively good defense and good skills built off of that defense, Arce, especially because I think he's usually most effective when he starts to pressure, the aggressive counterpunching, as you said, he can be hit early. And Moraes has a very, very good kicking game, like pretty mm-hmm. simple round kicks mostly, but very powerful, very quick, and well thrown body kicks and leg kicks. And the one thing that, which one is it? David or Daniel? Daniel Tamer. I just have to think every time, which one's the good one? BBC4. Dave is the good one. Daniel Tamer fought Julio Arce and had trouble. He also, like Moraes, probably a pretty good preparation opponent, to be honest. Like Moraes, only throws with power, doesn't really put his shots together, is used to overwhelming and just outpowering people. But he did have good success with the kicks. And I think Moraes is both a little taller and longer and a little more accurate and consistent with those weapons. And Arce is going to be taking some shots to the body and legs. But on the other hand, he and the very smart advice that the Schulman fighters tend to get in the corner are going to point him towards the solution to that, which is to double up on the pressure. Mm-hmm. Don't let Moraes keep kicking. He did a great job of that against Tamer. He took some kicks, he figured out how to avoid them, and his corner was like, all right, fine, now go whoop his ass. And he just came out and pressured heavily and destroyed Tamer. So I imagine a more dangerous version of Tamer, possibly a few more scary moments in this fight, but a pretty similar style matchup to my eye. So yeah, it's hard not to pick Arce. He's a lot of fun to watch, though.
Oh yeah,
Julio
but
Arce.
yeah, as you mentioned kicks. The other one to mention is obviously Rivera against the other Moraes, Marlon.
True. Could be a little high kick coming in there.
Yeah, so always something to look out for. This is one of the issues is if you have an entire gym made up of the same guys, it can leave them somewhat, expectant that other people are going to fight something like them.
Yeah.
And so if you're constantly focused on boxing, then you can be made to lean into kicks a bit more than you might otherwise.
Very true. Good point. All right. So a lot of fun matchups on this card. And that's all we have time for today. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and thank you so much for bearing with my voice. I didn't, until this point, make the comparison I usually make, which is the extremely emotionally resonant memory I have of watching the Flintstones as a child and being heartbroken when I realized that about halfway through that show's run, the voice actor for Barney Rubble changed. And boy, what a disappointment it was. And I know that must be the experience you're all having every time I'm sick on this show, but I promise I will be either better or dead next week. So problem solved either way. Until then, again, make sure you check out our Patreon. We're going to have a bonus episode coming up to recap UFC Moncton. Anthony Smith beat the number 2 light heavyweight contender. He is literally the greatest fighter of all time. And you guys, I hope, will enjoy hearing that. But until next week's full episode, Phil, what do you have coming out this week, my man?
Just got a preview coming out. So I think we're going to be breaking down Weidman, Souza, and Cormier Lewis, which should be... Mm-hmm. One of them should be probably a little bit sad, but the other one should be hilarious. And so, yeah, keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. As for me, I'm writing something on Adesanya, because I haven't written anything on him yet. And my God, I'm supposed to like striking technique. How can I allow this to pass? So, I'm kind of looking at not really Adesanya's sort of signature moves. I don't know, but just really highlighting techniques that I think are really cool and impressive and the fundamentals that make them work. Because Adesanya, he's the best of both worlds, Phil. He's the kind of fighter that, because he moves a lot and does crazy shit, even like a 2010 Joe Rogan would have complimented his footwork. But unlike the guys who used to get that praise, his crazy footwork is not a replacement for real footwork. He's got all of it. He's just a blast. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That'll probably come out the day after this episode goes up, if not the day of. But thank you all for listening. That's pretty much it from us. Find us on social media if you would like to complain about the tenor of my voice on this week's show. You can find me on Twitter at BoxingBush, BUSCH. And you can find Phil at Evil Greg Jackson. Of course, you can find the previews and the Adesanya article I mentioned and all of our other stuff on bloodyelbow.com. And again, make sure you check out our Patreon. Until next week, if you came here today for the finer points of face punching, you came to the right place. This has been Heavy Hands. Heavy Hands.
Nice.
Is that good? Is that a good comic conceit to end it on?
Yep.
Great.
I approve wholeheartedly.
I belong in vaudeville.
What was I going to say? Yeah, the weird thing is that, Adesanya doesn't move that much. He's actually he's pretty efficient with it.
Exactly, yeah. He has, these big, weird moves, but... that's actually the first thing I started writing about. His small steps are sensationally good. He has a way of sort of distracting you with what MMA people used to consider good footwork, while you are ignoring the fact that he is just sort of inching into range.